computer. There we go. Okay, welcome everybody. And we're going to jump right into the solar news here. So let me, I think I've got a, there we are. So anyway, the news this week are going to be that Georgia Power Company, they are trying to go ahead and require a $200 hookup fee in order to get solar, to put solar on your rooftop. And they're also looking to charge an additional $16.29 a month. What's interesting about this, other than they're trying to obviously slow down or repress the adoption of solar within their jurisdiction, but this comes on the heels of an investigation from CEA, which is the Solar Energy Industries Association, that found that they were
we lost you, Jay. Lost your volume.
all right, there we go.
There you're back.
Thanks. Okay, this comes on the heels of an investigation from CEA that found that Georgia Power Company had overcharged their customers $1.87 billion by instituting confusing billing structures. So I'm just wondering if this particular charge is retaliation against the solar industry for doing some investigation against them. All right, then let's see, that's what I was trying to do. John, I've got some background noise from you. If you could mute your mic, that'd be helpful. Then bifacial companies are suing the US government. Astra Energy, Canadian Solar, Jinko, Longi, some of the biggest companies really in the world, Trina Solar, they're suing to get the tariff money that was paid recently in the last couple of years back from the US government. And the reason for this is apparently with the bifacial solar panels, there was quite a confusing process involved in the issuing of these tariffs. Essentially, if we look at the timeline here, in 2018, the Trump administration instituted a 30% tariff, not only on all solar panels, but bifacial as well. Then in 2019, the courts ruled that because there were no domestic manufacturers of bifacial solar panels, that the tariff law did not apply because you can't really punish people with tariffs when there's no domestic supply. Apparently, that's what I'm going by from what I read. So they reversed the tariff on bifacial panels. But then shortly thereafter, the Trump administration reinstituted the bifacial tariff. It was challenged in court, and the court ruled against the Trump administration and took the tariff away. Well, then a couple months later, the Trump administration reinstituted the tariff, challenged in court. The court overruled it, found it to be, an illegal tariff, and it was overturned. Well, then they reinstituted it again through executive order. And after a lengthy court battle, it was overturned once again. So it was the on again, off again, on again. Well, the solar companies are maintaining that clearly every single time it went to court, the courts found in their favor the tariff in its entirety was illegal and they want their money back. So that was the history there. Solve Energy has announced that they're going to invest in a company called Swap Robotics. And Swap Robotics has, I've got a picture of it there, but they've got this maintenance, a little lawnmower thing for solar arrays. And what they do there is these things map out the site, and then they can be remotely dispatched to cut down the vegetation around ground-mounted systems. And they do rely 100% on the electricity from the array. So kind of a neat little thing. There, although I say that, and here we are promoting solar as a way of good jobs and the like, but more and more of the activities surrounding solar seem to be something that can be handled pretty effectively by robotics. So who knows, we may be cutting our own throat here. 308 companies have filed a petition with the ICC The ICC is the International Code Council, and what they're doing is objecting to FEMA's recent proposal. We talked about this last week, but FEMA is making a proposal that the analysis shows may add as much as 30 to 40% to the cost of installing ground-mounted systems. So specifically what they're asking is that ground-mounted systems meet Category 4 construction standards. Now, currently, the law says that these ground-mounted solar arrays have to meet Category 1, and Category 1 is essentially the same as agricultural storage facilities or warehouse facilities as far as the construction and how well they stand up against against natural disasters. Well, FEMA is saying because this is a utility, has to be hardened as other utility infrastructure, and that they should go ahead and harden it to Category 4. CEA and a number of other groups are arguing that they're coming back with a compromise, Category 2, which would not add these kind of costs. In fact, the CEA CEO, Abigail Ross Harper, noted, she said that this is clearly an overreach. It's being made in an opaque fashion, all these good buzzwords, that without any kind of input from industry experts, without any kind of impact or notice about how this economically impacts the industry. So the voting is going on right now through the ICC, and we'll see how that comes to play out. And then the Department of Energy has announced $14 million in grants on how large-scale solar affects habitat and wildlife in the vicinity. Some examples of what they're doing now. This is being deployed in about 26 different states. They're spreading the money around. $2 million going to Cornell University for a study on pollinators and insects, how these systems affect it, how solar affects that. $2 million going to Sandia National Labs. This one's kind of interesting. It's not about photovoltaics. It's about concentrated solar, which is where you use the mirrors and concentrate the rays to superheat a liquid, usually a molten salt. They're trying to see how they can mitigate bird deaths around these systems. I can imagine these birds probably fly in and get fried up. There's 1.3 million from the University of Arkansas about vegetation and bird diversity around solar arrays. One interesting one, Wildlands Network is getting 1.7 million to study pronghorn sheep of all things, and other mammals that are affected from solar. So I suspect Don will say that government money being handed out, and I don't know that I disagree, but it'll be interesting to see if there are long-term effects from large-scale solar on habitat and wildlife. In fact, a big chunk of money is going towards looking at how this impacts the soil. I know it's a big concern with farmland, where if you take farmland, existing farmland out of production to make it into a solar array, what happens if you then revert that back to farming? Has the soil been impacted in some way that's not anticipated? So we'll see how that works out. Okay, that's the news that I have for this week. Does anybody else have anything to add? I know Don had mentioned before we got started about perhaps a lawsuit going on in Massachusetts about high access fees to see, I suspect we're going to see a lot more of those, such as the Georgia one, where they're wanting to charge $200 just to link in. But anybody have anything to add in the news or anything for a discussion point? Okay. All right, well, let me jump into the topic that I had said, and if something comes to mind, of course, feel free to interrupt as we move forward. But as I was looking through a lot of the information out there in the solar world this week, time and time again, it comes up about the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act. And it's very, very confusing how this is going to be affecting the solar industry. So I thought I'd try and do a little bit deeper dive into what are the tax implications What are the credits that are associated? A lot of people in the industry are saying that this is like a watershed moment within the solar industry that will be looked back at for decades to come, saying there was the industry before the Inflation Reduction Act, and there's the industry after. So I just think it'll be interesting to talk about it, and perhaps some of this information, I wouldn't be surprised if, as the rules are written, this turns out to be perhaps not exactly right. Hard to say that I tell things that aren't exactly right, but let's dive into it a little bit. From the residential standpoint, it really is about the investment tax credit as far as how the residential impact of the residential marketplace is. We saw that before this act was passed, we were down to about 26%. It was going to phase down even further. What they did is extended the 30% tax credit back to the beginning of 2022, and then extends on for another 10 years, 10 years total, and then it begins to step down. So it does give a lot of stability to those people who are looking at planning, trying to see, you know, there's no mad rush to the end of the year trying to take advantage of the tax credit. The other thing that impacts residential marketplace is you can now install battery backup, just standalone without solar, and still take advantage of the industry's the ITC. Before you had to install solar with the battery. Now you can just put in, for instance, a Tesla Powerwall or something like that without a solar array, and it will still qualify. So from the residential standpoint, that's really the major impact. I'm going to grab my notes over here. From the commercial standpoint, is really where the confusion comes into play. So let's take a little bit closer look here. From the commercial standpoint, there is the 30% tax credit for those people installing, but pretty much only if the installation is made using prevailing wage. So prevailing wage being essentially union wages. And I was trying to get a sense of what that was. It really varies by state and even by county. I looked up Muskingum County here where I am in Ohio, and the prevailing wage rate here for electrical work, which I assume is where this would fall in, is a base rate $35.25. And then fringe benefits, which include medical, pension, training, vacation, they put that at another $22.78. So essentially an hourly rate of $58.03. So quite well paid there for the electrician under the prevailing wage. But as I said, that varies from location to location, but it doesn't seem like it would be less than that. Because of course, where I'm at, we're in the backwater of beyond. So, so that is a big issue there. Now, in addition to the 30% ITC, the investment tax credit, then there is another 10% add-on. So you would be getting 40% tax credit if you use domestically manufactured product. What they're saying here is that 100% of it needs to be for the steel. If there are steel components within the system, then 100% of that has to be domestically manufactured. In a typical rooftop system, there may be little or no steel as part of that, but in a ground-mounted system, there may be substantial amounts of steel in the support structure that's part of it. And then the solar content has to be at least initially 40% domestic. So that would include the panels, inverters, racking systems, all of that kind of thing, 40% domestic. Now, because the industry is very global in nature, for example, a solar panel may rely on polysilicon that's mined and the ingots made in China and then shipped off to Malaysia to be made into cells, and then the cells are shipped off to the United States, for instance, to be assembled. Well, then what qualifies as domestic? Is it a US panel because it was assembled here, or is it not? So all of those things are going to have to be worked out, but I'm assuming that the manufacturers are going to be the ones who will say, hey, this product qualifies for this credit. I just can't imagine that they're not going to do that.
Jay, a question.
Sure.
So if I'm a contractor and I'm installing these systems, you're saying that in order to qualify the tax credit, I have to pay my employees $58 an hour?
Yes, if you're doing it for commercial systems. Residential systems, that doesn't appear to be the case. But
that's just going to drive the price up dramatically and make it less affordable.
Yeah, very likely. Although on the other side, it will make it an industry that's not like a Walmart industry, that the people are going to get paid well. And actually, the labor that's involved in the installation is just a tiny portion of the total cost. A fraction of a fraction. So my guess is the difference between paying somebody $20 an hour and $50 an hour will probably be relatively little when it comes down to the total cost of the solar array. Especially in these large utility scale systems or commercial scale systems. So, I mean, this was part of the whole motivation. Yeah, to get.
Isn't that going to cascade back all the way to the products too?
I don't know if prevailing wage requires for product manufacturers, but domestic products are, one of the reasons they moved over shore is to make it cheaper. So my guess is the products are going to get more expensive if they are manufactured in the United States, or at least more expensive than what we've been used to. I would suppose that some of the debate when this was being passed as to why it was warranted would be to say, listen, if we want to develop a highly skilled and highly paid workforce, and we want to have products manufactured here in the United States, there are going to be costs involved that the end consumer doesn't initially want to pay. So why don't we subsidize that as that industry is being developed, and then hopefully we'll see costs coming down over time. That's the argument I'd make if I were trying to sell this thing. Now, whether that comes to pass is something we'll know in 20 years. We're just guessing now.
It sounds kind of like the electric car thing, where as soon as they put another, they gave those car manufacturers a $7,500 credit, they all raised their prices $7,499.
Sure. And we saw that in solar. I remember way back in the early days, of course, 2008, 2007, there was a $50,000 grant for solar in the state of Ohio if you installed a 10 kW or larger system. And so all of a sudden, everybody was putting a 10 kW system on their home, whether they needed it or not. And the solar installers were charging an extra 50 grand, and saying, hey, don't worry about it. You don't have to pay that.
It's all free. Yeah. It goes to us.
So yeah, sometimes these things have unintended consequences, and other times they work the way they're designed. So, I guess I don't want to prejudge it just yet, although I understand the skepticism. Then again, above the domestic content, there's a 10% added for energy communities. So this again would now take it up to 50% tax credit, where energy communities is anything that's a brownfield, that's a registered brownfield, or a brownfield being a step below like a black field where it's polluted, needs to be, I'm not sure the process you go through to have it truly registered that way. If you're at or near a coal mine that's been closed since at some point after 1999, some people are calling this provision the Joe Manchin or the West Virginia provision, because it also then qualifies if you're near a closed power plant that relied on coal. that was closed after 2009. So we're going to have to figure out where these places are, but then you will get an additional 10%. This also applies if you live in a community where 25% of the local taxes were from the fossil fuel industry, which probably covers all of West Virginia. So who knows? So this you get an extra 10%. Then there are two other provisions that add on again. There's a 10% additional credit if you're putting this in a low income or tribal land location. Now, this is a competitive bid deduction. So it's not for everybody. It's basically you apply to the Department of the Treasury to see if you can receive that. And it's capped. It's capped at a total of 1.8 gigawatts per year. And each of these systems have to be 5 megawatts or smaller in size. They will be competitively awarded, although they haven't determined whether it's a first come, first serve, or if they're going to be based on merit or something like that. So we'll see. And then there's a 20% if it's part of a low income housing project. Again, that is competitively bid. So really under this scenario, in theory, you could get as much as a 70% tax credit if you ticked off all of those, at the high end there, which is pretty remarkable. They're also increasing there as part of this bill. There are some other issues that have come to pass here. One, a big one, and maybe Don, you have some comment on this because I'm not really sure how the financial market will work with this, but the transferability of these credits. So essentially they were talking about as far as financing. You could then, I guess, assign these credits as revenue to another source.
What I've heard is that people are like that. However, a lot of the big structural things are still going to be probably tax equity deals, which is where you have an investor who takes the credits and stuff. And because there's still depreciation, and a lot of other stuff that is not transferable.
Sure.
Doing the credits helps, but if you're doing it for a business, like a big wind farm or a solar farm, they still think you're going to have those kind of structured financial.
I would imagine, plus the accelerated depreciation, as you mentioned, is you can deduct as much as almost 100% of the project in the first year.
You can, if for normal equipment and businesses, you can deduct 100%. I think up until the end of might have ended last year, might still be through this year. I had to go back and check. Okay. But with this stuff, you can deduct effectively. You don't deduct more than 100%, but you get back more than 100% because you only reduce your basis by 50% of the credits you get.
Right.
So if you get 50% credits, you can deduct 75% and get a 50% credit. So you've effectively recovered more than 100% of your investment.
Yeah. In fact, I was talking to somebody, from Illinois, who was saying that with the Illinois RECs and with these tax credits and with the depreciation and everything, they're seeing some agencies, some nonprofits that are getting more than 100% payback in the first year with the development of these, which is pretty amazing. Of course, and part of that with the direct pay to nonprofits, that's another provision, and that's a huge provision as far as these bodies are concerned, because the tax credits have always been awarded, but you could only take advantage of them if you had tax liability. So if you were a nonprofit organization or a governmental body, or say a municipal electric company or a co-op, those are all nonprofits, they could not take advantage of these tax credits because of course they had no tax liability. So oftentimes they would work with partners who would develop the project, for-profit partners, and then sell them the power through a power purchase agreement or something like that. Well, now a school system, for example, could build their own system, own their own system, and get the investment tax credit back in the form of a rebate. So it would be money back. So, you know, it's not free money in that you're basically spending $1 and getting perhaps 50 cents back, but clearly it's impactful to the financial decisions of putting that thing together. Another issue for these larger systems is the cost of going through all of the interconnection paperwork and filings and all of that. Well, that now can be added as part of the basis of the installation, which then qualifies it for tax credits and depreciation and all of that kind of thing. Apparently, I've not done these big interconnection processes, but apparently that was not a thing before. And then it brings up the ITC versus PTC. And I just thought I would mention this because, you know, it may be confusing to you. It certainly was confusing to me. But the ITC, the investment tax credit, is money back in your pocket, you know, either in the form of a tax credit or if you're a nonprofit in the form of a rebate. But that's based on the initial cost of the system. So if I spend $100,000 on the installation of this system, I may be able to get back $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in tax credits through the ITC. But alternatively, I might choose to take a production tax credit. And that production tax credit is not based on how much it costs me to install the system, it's based on how much it's producing. So for a period of 10 years, the initial production tax credit, let me look at my notes here, see if I can find it. Here we go. Yeah, $2.6 cents per kilowatt hour. So, so rather than getting money back, I will receive this as a tax credit, as a credit at a rate of 2.6 cents per kilowatt hour of production. Now, where this comes into play is, let's say you have a very high producing but very low cost system that you installed, and you may find that it works out better to take the production credit as opposed to the initial tax credit. Or maybe you find yourself that in the year of installing it, you didn't need that kind of credit or whatever, and you're just going to roll it over. But I think this is really more focused on the utility scale systems as opposed to smaller commercial systems, and certainly not residential. I don't think they even qualify for the PTC. So that will be interesting. I'm sure we'll see a lot more about that. And then there was the REAP grants, which I've been involved with, which is through the USDA, the Department of Agriculture. And they have for a number of years been providing grants of up to 25% for rural and agricultural businesses. So basically, they defined an agricultural business or a rural business as anything located in a jurisdiction of less than 50,000 people. So pretty much outside of the major metropolitan areas. And so you can get a 25% grant. Now, these are competitively bid, but they've increased the amount going to REAP. I think they've added about $2 billion into that program. And they've even said that they're looking at increasing the amount there up to as much as 50%. So if you're a rural business and you're looking at installing solar, and theoretically you could get a 50% tax credit on your system, and you could get a 50% grant from the USDA, you know, at least right now, that's 100% financing. This would only apply to commercial, not to residential. You know, backing all of these things back out, the only ones that apply to the residential are the 30% investment tax credit that applies not only to the solar array that you're putting on your home, but also the if you want to put batteries in with or without solar, the battery technology will still apply. And I know that there's also for some home energy changes and things like that, but we're really just focusing on solar here. Okay, so I think that's the deep dive that I wanted to jump into. Hopefully it will illuminate rather than confuse, but does anybody have any comments or any questions about how this thing is going to affect us?
So I have a question, Jay.
Sure.
The tax credit for the domestic materials, I think that begs the question, how do you get the domestic panels? What's the best way to actually get your hands on domestic panels? Just call your distributor.
Yeah.
How do you recommend?
Yeah, I think there's a short-term answer and there's a long-term answer. The short-term answer is, my guess is the current crop of solar panels, none of them may qualify. We have such a dominance of Chinese cells and polycrystalline that it may be, depending on how the IRS writes the rules, because all these rules are now being written, as we speak. It may be they decide that the content rules are such that nothing that's currently manufactured qualifies. We certainly do have some solar panels that are assembled here in the United States. And we do have a pretty thriving thin film solar panel market, like First Solar up near Toledo. And those would qualify because they don't use silicon. But I don't know. I mean, the distributors are definitely going to be stamping these things and advertising these things as meeting the domestic manufacturing qualification. So that's the long-term answer. At some point, we will start to see, yes, this has been approved as meeting this. But for right now, my guess is you don't. I mean, there's probably very little or nothing out there that will meet the qualification on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, it's not a satisfactory answer, but it's all we got.
No, that wasn't the answer I wanted. Sorry.
Yes. Now you can still go out. Now, again, this applies to commercial. For your residential, I think you may be looking at, I want to support the domestic industry. And there are a number of panel manufacturers out there that advertise themselves as made in America. So you may want to just look for that when you're selecting. And if you don't know who those are, or it's not very transparent, I would give a call to the distributor that you work with, and they should know. Okay, does anybody have any suggestions of made in America products they've worked with that might help Catherine at all?
I thought there was a company in Texas. I didn't buy their panels, but I remember seeing them when I was looking for panels about a year ago, that they kept. We were on what's the one out west? The big company out west, the distributor.
Wholesale Solar?
Yeah, I think it was Wholesale Solar. It was on their website. That's probably been a year and a half ago.
Yeah, and I know Alt-E has had some, that talk about made in America, but I don't remember the manufacturer. I'm still reeling from the fact that Canadian Solar is not made in Canada. So I don't trust any of these guys. So I'm sure, you'll find one USA Solar Panels, and it's probably, made in the Uyghur district of China. So I do know that there is a manufacturer of microinverters that is American made. I remember, and the Generac, it's now under the Generac label. But that is the only microinverter today that's made in the US. But I suspect that's going to change soon as well. Okay, any other questions or any other comments? Or anything for the good of the group? Nope. Okay, well, then we'll call it a day. That's what I had. So we'll talk to you all later. All right.
Thanks, Jay.
See you next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Sure.
Bye.